Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, or good night, depends on where you are connecting and sharing with us this special webinar that we have about inclusive event facilitation, challenge, best practices, and opportunities. We are part of the Global Network for Science Communication, and we consider that from webinars, panels, workshops, or festivals, we often involve facilitating conversations with diverse individuals. But how do we ensure those conversations are welcoming and accessible to both the speakers and participants? I am Ana Claudia Nepote. I'm from Mexico, and I am part of the scientific committee PCST, and we are considered very important to talk about this and how to improve or develop these activities in public activities, also considering a lot of diverse people and how we can dialogue among us. So I will thank Michelle Riedlinger, Luz Elena, Nick Bennett, and Tilina Entiagla for being here tonight or this morning with us, talking about this idea of inclusiveness in science communication. So please, Michelle, I will ask you to present yourself and share your experience in this field.
Thanks very much, Ana Claudia. Hi, everyone. I'll just give you a visual description first. I'm a middle-aged Australian woman with brown curly hair and brown eyes. I've got mostly German and French, from mostly German and French heritage, and I'm wearing teal glasses, and I like to wear scarves. So today I'm wearing a bright pink scarf and a black shirt. I've been a bit about me. I've been a member of the PCST network since 1996, and I've been on the scientific committee of the PCST network since 2016. And I currently chair the finance committee. I'm an associate professor in the School of Communication at the Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane, Australia. And my research focuses on technological changes within knowledge sectors. So looking at journalism and scholarly publishing and how these changes impact science communication practices. So I've chaired a lot of events, I've facilitated a lot of workshops, I've run a lot of focus groups, and I thought I'd share get us started by sharing just some of the basics for us to build on. And I want to start off by talking about how good session organisation and good timekeeping, I think, are key responsibilities for inclusive chairs and facilitators. So being organised and keeping to time are the foundation for making sure that presenters and participants are respected and heard and valued. And I want to talk a bit about those basic requirements before we move on to thinking about some special cases. And so for me, the key roles for chair people and facilitators to think about, and these are at a bare minimum, introducing the event and the speakers, giving the agenda, keeping the speakers and activities to time, initiating and running the question time or facilitating the activities during the event, showing appreciation for everyone who's participated, so thanking speakers or the panel or those who attended, so leading the applause, and also closing the session on time. So firstly, I think setting the agenda, making sure everyone present knows upfront how the session will run and what is expected of them, so they know how they can participate and what you are doing to make the event inclusive. So introducing this at the beginning of the event so everyone knows what the agenda is, and whether the chair and facilitator and the presenters or any activities, whether we're sticking to the agenda or whether we're going off, because that will be important for everyone involved. I think when introducing speakers who are part of a formal program, say who they are, where they're from, what they're going to speak about, or like Ana Claudia did, in a more informal setting, get people to introduce themselves. And I think good introductions are prepared and discussed with speakers in advance. So do your homework and make sure you can pronounce names of the speakers and any other information about them correctly. So doing that work up front. And I think if you're running a more interactive event, it's important for you to have as much information about the participants as possible. So again, do your homework before the event. Encourage participants to introduce themselves before speaking, so everybody knows the position that they're coming from. And also, as I said, keeping to time. And this is the most important role of the chairperson or facilitator. I think poor chairing or facilitation is allowing speakers and sessions to go over time. So don't mistake being inclusive with letting speakers or a session run over. Good planning and good communication is key. So work with speakers to agree on a system of timekeeping in advance that they're comfortable with, so they know if they've got 1 or 2 minutes left. Some people get nervous with a card or a light or something. So think about something that will catch their eye, but not be intrusive. You can stand up when a speaker has only a few minutes left and move to the side. But once they're finished, you can look at moving towards them. So they know they should be finishing up. And you can also do this with audience members, I think, if you feel somebody's using up too much time and not giving others the opportunity to speak. So just move towards them, stand beside them if you can do so, and gently let them know it's time for somebody else to speak, open up to others. I'll finish in a minute because I think some of the other points I'm going to make will come up later, but if people remember one problematic thing about chairing or facilitation, it's that the session didn't run to time. So don't be that person. Yeah, I think my colleague's going to build on some of these points around activities and including the audience. So I'll leave it there for now. Happy to jump in, talk about running question time and activities to ensure everyone's included, particularly when an event is hybrid. So hopefully we'll get to talk a bit about that.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And in a network, an international network like PCST, it's very important to learn the different, be aware of the different pronunciations and the names. Probably we made some mistakes in pronunciations also, and talking slowly. And the time that you pointed out is very important during conferences, because if the time from other speakers will depend on our time, no? So that's very, very important.
And you're absolutely right. I speak too fast. I always write on my notes, slow down. So I apologize if I've done it again.
No, that's fine. That's fine. But we need to think about, yes, other persons. We are now in Zoom in virtual environments, so we can also use the captation to support. No? Thank you, Michelle. Now I will love to take the microphone to Tilina, who is connecting and join us this evening from Japan. Please, could you introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to join, even I was a little bit late. So my name is Tilina, which means a gift in Sinhalese language, which is one of the Sri Lankan languages. And it sounds very feminine, but for anybody from South Asia, it's very like a male name immediately, ending with A's. And all the other names sort of ending with natural names, but we don't really call it because I think it was already in the culture many generations. And so I am from South Asia, Sri Lankan, and I have dark black hair and brown eyes and brown skin, and I'm today wearing a light black sweater, a lot of blacks and browns. I'm an assistant professor and director of communication at the Earth Life Science Institute in Tokyo, where we study astrobiology and origin of life. And so I'm focused on interdisciplinary side of it, bringing astrobiology and origin of life with arts, ethics, philosophy, communication, and I'm also working on decolonizing science, especially with United Nations, a bit more focused on astronomy. And I'm also working as one of the biggest things that actually also related to PCST is that I'm a core member of the Japan SciComm Forum, JSF, which is hosting the first PCST symposium in Japan this year in November 11 to 13. So everybody is welcome to join. With that, today I want to talk about how we can respond when microaggressions or PR show up during any sort of events that we are facilitating, and or even as a participant. And because they do show up, and I'm sure you might have noticed by now, or maybe you haven't noticed. And but even the events that are full of good intentions, that everybody goes home happily, these things happen. It just not all of us are really aware of it, and we don't notice it. And so first, microaggressions are very, very subtle, and sometimes they are unintentional, and they can be like very passing by comments and actions that sort of reinforce over a joke or very sort of like stereotypical ways of and making comments or marginalizing people. And most of the time, they are sort of dismissed in this one phrase that I kind of love, which I'm being very sarcastic, saying, I didn't mean it like that. And I think that's a phrase that I've heard in my life so many times. And and I'm sure I have also said that myself, because this is a learning curve for all of us, and none of us are actually perfect. We will make mistakes, and also mistakes are actually a way to learn for ourselves. And so as facilitators, we need to also remember that we impact actually matters a lot than sort of the intent. And even if someone didn't harm, the impact can still hurt. And it can happen on the day or maybe later, but maybe months later. And so our role is not to judge whether someone meant well, it's to sort of acknowledge that harm and create a sort of like safer environment moving forward. And I want to sort of give three very short strategies that you can practice and be aware and keep an eye. First one is actually pause and acknowledge. So if I imagine if a microaggression happens, for example, a dismissive comment about somebody's accent, which I get all the time because I have a South Asian accent, some of the words doesn't really come across the same way. And Michelle also mentioned that you speak faster. My problem is actually I don't pronounce the words that they're expected from the English-speaking countries. And so when these kind of somebody's dismissive comments happen for accents or identities, you can take a quick pause on the conversation, and you don't even have to have like a perfect response. Something very simple like, let's pause. I want to recognize that comment may have caused harm, even if it's unintended, and sort of naming it at that moment helps to prevent it normalizing. So I think one of the problem is that if we don't do it on the go, and it becomes sort of like we are sort of being part of the problem of making it normalizing. And if something gets normalized, it's really, really difficult to go back to or change it. And the second tip I want to share is like use allies. And it's very important that maybe even if you're doing a workshop and an event or a session at PCST or some other conference by yourself, there's always people who are willing to help you in your session. So you don't have to do it alone. And it doesn't have to be like an official organizer or someone. It can be a friend or someone you met at the previous conference. And so if you have if you set up any allies or even, if you have co-facilitators, it's great. And then you might even set some norms to start. So for example, you can say, we encourage everyone to support each other in maintaining respectful space. And so this sort of set the scene from the start. And that also, I have seen many times that this helps to setting something that like this in the beginning helps to stop something halfway through, because it doesn't come across abruptly, because you already gave a warning in the upfront. And the third one is to separate impact and intent. A lot of the time we sort of combine these two. So sometimes the person who made the comment will say that, but that's not what I meant. And for things like these, you can respond, I appreciate you sharing that. What matters most is how it was received and how we can move forward. And this sort of keeps the focus on community and not on defending individual attentions. And finally, I also want to emphasize, you don't have to solve everything in the moment. And that's impossible. That's also sort of bringing the focus into a completely different area. But as facilitators, we do have a responsibility to recognize them and support those who are affected and sort of gently guide the space back to inclusion. And the more we practice, the easier it becomes. And trust me, it feels like a lot in the beginning, even to say these things out loud, but when you keep doing it, every single thing you do, even when you're giving a talk, it becomes normal to you and it becomes normal to everyone else. All right, with that, I'll give it back to other panelists, and I'm happy to jump in later on to answer anything. Thank you.
Thank you, Pilina. Thank you very much for sharing this interesting topic about microaggressions and all things that could happen in a dialogue, conversation, or conference. Now I will pass the voice to Luz Elena, who is joining us from Colombia. Please, Luz Elena, welcome.
Hi, good night for me, for this part of the world. My name is Luz, which means light in Spanish. I am a woman in my 40s and I have long brown hair and I'm wearing glasses. And I also have a nose piercing. And today I'm wearing a bright green shirt with yellow tigers on it. I currently work at Explora, a science center in Medellin, Colombia. And I am a community engagement coordinator at the museum. I have been part of PCST scientific committee since 2021. This is my last year. And I have participated in many outreach projects, such as museum exhibits, educational experiences, science popularization books. And well, I'm happy to be here to share some of our experiences at the museum. And I will expand our conversation, not only for academic sessions, but other types of events. So at the museum, we aim for participation. We want to close gaps and make our publics as diverse as possible. A traditional museum, like the publics of the museum are tourists or, like specific people. And a lot of people doesn't feel that a museum is a place for them. So you actually need to reach out for this diversity. So to reach this really big goal, we are aware of three things. One is that this is a journey, a work in progress, a back and forth, a permanent conversation. We value every step, but we are also aware there is still a lot to do. And at the museum, we promote ownership. It's not only a matter of people at the day team advocating, but we also want this to become a collective movement. It's also for educators, designers, communicators, marketing, and operation teams. And we also think beyond the main event or the main action happening. Inclusion is also about vendors, food services, and spaces. We like to make this as complete as possible. And we, like in this journey, we are aware of all the challenges that we have, that they might be attitudinal challenges, material, training challenges, economic challenges. So it's good to have all these like landscape, no, of what you, like what's your journey precisely. The second thing I want to mention is a mantra, nothing about us without us, from the global movement for the rights of persons with disabilities. And for this, we collaborate with community leaders. We partner with trusted and recognized figures from the communities. And we also invite people that represent diversity to participate, to plan, to train. And it's our dream to have this diversity also represented inside the museum, in our teams. For example, having interns is a good starting point, and maybe you don't have to, you know, like, I mean, it's easier for human resources, for example, to accept an intern sometimes. So that's a good starting point to make like the revolution. And third, consider and be aware of levels of participation. According to Nina Simon, a museum might be a host for communities, but communities also might be contributors to exhibits, but maybe also collaborators. But also we want to have co-creation, like be able to think about an idea from scratch with our publics and our communities. So having these three things in mind, I'm gonna also mention 3 events and activities. One is a deaf night to awake listeners that we did with La Casa Señante, a designing house, a deaf culture collective. And during that night, we did a deaf theater performance, science and music experiences at the museum led by La Casa Señante. And we also explored sign language. People received a personal sign name, and which is a unique identity for deaf in deaf culture. And this is my sign. And I also want to share Astronomy Club for deaf people, Astronomía en tus manos, Astronomy in your hands, and Astronomy Club for blind people, El Ojo Sonoro, the Sonic Eye. And these are groups of people getting together to share knowledge about astronomy in the planetarium. And the third event or process that I want to mention are artistic residencies. La Casa Señante, also a great ally, participated in anticipations, a call for local artists, which was a call to answer some of these questions. What worlds are born from oppression? Which bodies have been excluded from history? What is the relationship between science and the normalization of bodies? And they did and came together with a performance, Lengua Mala, and they reclaim and honor those who fight, resist, and exist despite exclusion and the forced obligation to adapt. In the end, it's all about relationships, building community, and connecting with people's interests and needs. And I'll be happy to answer questions and keep the conversation going.
Thank you very much, Luz. And yes, I just put in the chat that if you have some comments, questions, please write them in the chat, and we will have more time at the end to talk more about this topic. Now, I would love to listen to Nick Bennett, who is from Michigan State University now. And Nick, the micro is all yours.
Thank you. Hi, y'all. I'm Nick. I use they, them pronouns. I'm really grateful to be in conversation with these colleagues. Thanks for guiding us with all this truth, all this love. It is a difficult time to be a trans person or a person doing research on these topics in the United States. But it is doing my heart a lot of good to be in this space, so thank you. I'm a white, non-binary person in my late 30s. I've got blue eyes and a purpley red mullet with gray streaks and short sides, and it goes down to my mid-neck. I've got gold-rimmed aviator-style glasses and a silver septum ring. I've got on a black and white houndstooth vest, a black button-down shirt, black bow tie, a purple blazer, and my background is blurred. Calling y'all from East Lansing in Michigan in the United States. These are the lands of the Anishinaabe, Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi peoples. A bit about me, I research power, identity, and belonging in science communication. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow with the SciComm Identities Project at Michigan State University. It is a science communication training program which seeks to embrace marginalized scientist identities for more inclusive communication. I also engage arts and science-based research and practice, especially theater of the oppressed, to critique, disrupt, and imagine science communication spaces. I'm also a community organizer with Showing Up for Racial Justice, and more recently with the recently formed Scientists for Solidarity. Alongside scientists, artists, activists, and community members, I hope to help science find its way into solidarity with the people. I'm happy to talk about anything in my biography that interests you, but I'm actually going to speak a bit more broadly about how we can think about inclusivity and how we might imagine we as a PCST community might even challenge ourselves even more. So if we're having conversations about diversity, equity, inclusion, if we're not talking about power, we're actually engaging in a strategy that is it's actually kind of vapid. So I'm going to draw from philosopher Olufemi Taiwo's thinking in writing Elite Capture, how the powerful took over identity politics and everything else. So as we do this work of inclusive events, it can be really tempting to make decisions that make us look like good people instead of making changes that build a future that works for all of us. And we know in this room, we're not here to make minor adjustments to an unjust system. We're here to envision and create a just one. So, for example, in the US, many institutions after the Black Lives Matter uprisings of 2020 had a lot of symbolic gestures, but these often came without material reform. There was often like a rebranding, but not a replacing or a rethinking of existing institutions. So to do that, we can shift our thinking from what Taiwo calls deference politics, which is simply moving the spotlight from one person to another, towards constructive politics, where we change the very structures that produce harm. So deference politics means deferring to the person in the room with the most marginalized identities. This is a really good first step, don't get me wrong, but we need to challenge ourselves by leaving that room to encounter and center those who are not even in our spaces yet. So instead of only these deference politics, we want constructive politics. We want to think about outcome, not just process. Thinking about the impact versus intention feels really like a good tie-in. And this might involve like rebuilding of society by challenging underlying structures, not just addressing symptoms with a Band-Aid. So it helps us to think about how we're accountable to those who are absent from our room, to focus on redistribution of real resources rather than just engaging in symbolic gestures. And this is good for all of us, even those of us who have dominant identities like myself, because a world that works for everyone is actually better for all of us, not just those at the top. Thinking about only who is included in the rooms themselves kind of limits our imagination. We can think about how we might remake the room entirely. Inclusive events is a site where many of us have agency to do this work. We can't necessarily like go and rearrange entire institutions and structures, but we do have our own sphere of power. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not an act of charity. Remaking these spaces so that everyone can reach them and everyone can get their needs met in the spaces is a future that works better for me too. So in our conferences, are we just working to change who's holding the mic, or are we thinking about the room itself, the deeper structural change? So as chairs, as leaders, as organizers, we can ask, are we accountable to the people who are not yet in our rooms? What structures are we trying to change? Not just in the meeting itself, but like long after it ends. So collective liberation involves work both inside the rooms and outside our spaces. And so as those who are inside the room, what is our work? Are we taking actions to be accountable to those on the outside? We can't do everything, but we can do something. And we may not be able to remake oppressive structures overnight, but like I said earlier, we do have our own sphere of influence. So let's say you're tasked with putting together a panel for a conference. Here's some questions you can ask yourself. What is my end goal in doing it this way? Am I accountable to people who don't yet have access to this space? Am I working to change the attention landscape in the room and pass the mic? Or am I also working to change power structures? Liberatory access, as disability justice organizer Mia Mingus reminds us, is not just about installing a ramp or having captions. Those are all amazing things, but it's also about transforming the conditions that made inaccessibility normal in the first place. It's about moving from inclusion to liberation. This is also the crux of the abolition and transformative justice work I'm a part of. You work not only to address the harm and the immediate needs the harm creates, but you also make sure the harm doesn't happen again. We're working to transform the conditions that allowed harm to happen in the first place. So as we gather virtually today, I'll remind us of a phrase that we often say in community organizing is that the workshop is not the work. This is always a great invitation and a great place to talk about things, but I cannot wait to hear how you take this workshop and then do the work. And that solution is material change, it's structural change, transformative change. And I look forward to building that change together with what bell hooks would say as a love as a practice of freedom. So not only for ourselves, but for those outside these rooms too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick Bennett, and this very, very inspiring conversation. We have a lot of challenge in PCST conferences or science communication activities. Now I would like to, well, listening to Luz and listening to you, Nick, I was remembering at least here in Latin America, we also have many challenges about intergenerational ways of understanding and naming ourselves. No, we have all these powerful youth, very creative, and in the other hand, or sometimes we find persons who are not willing or not. It's not easy for them to change or embrace all this diversity that we are relating to in our conversations or in our events. How do you deal with these cultural and contextual limitations or to to facilitate events and to moderate events with inclusion when you have among your public maybe people who are not very collaborative, accepting all this diversity. I don't know, Nick, if you want to change to answer, or maybe Luz also.
You go ahead.
I'll follow. Oh, you want me to go ahead? Okay. I thank you for this question. I think it's a really important one. I think of it in two levels. One is the like person-to-person level of how do I meet someone where they are, which can feel exhausting sometimes. But if we are doing this work, how am I meeting that person and finding and digging deeper to their values? Because we can dig deep enough eventually and find values that we share, even if there's things we may never agree with. So thinking about the things that do bring us together and how can I then build trust and build relationship with that person to kind of come alongside them on their journey. There were people that invited me in and kept me accountable when I was early and unlearning. And I think about how we can be that to folks in our spaces. And then there's the room itself. Like sometimes we often also want to think about how we are protecting a space. So if someone is like maybe taking up a lot of the oxygen in the room, we can also kind of have boundaries around, hey, actually, that's a conversation for later, and that might be better on the one-on-one. How might we like really have nice boundaries around this space as we're actually centering those who are most marginalized.
Thank you. Luz, do you want to add something?
My mic just disappears. Well, I would say to have people meet each other. So when you focus on the difference or a tag, it's harder. But if you meet Sofia and you meet Daniel and you meet Sebastian, then your barrier, it magically goes away. So you have to meet the difference and not like see difference, at the eyes. So I think that's the most effective way, because even if you don't know how to communicate with a deaf person, you have a body and you can, you can try, or you can, like just be there and jump. I would say that I would recommend that.
Michelle or Tilina, how do you deal with different type of public or persons who are shy or are not very willing to participate because they are not feel comfortable? How do you make them feel part of the group or part of the workshop or part of the conversation?
I'm happy to jump in and just have a go. Not everybody feels. Yeah, firstly, I'll say I really liked what Nick said about the normalizing of inaccessibility, that there's something there that I think if we're not feeling uncomfortable as people who are representing scientific institutions or academic institutions, we're probably not doing our job. We need to understand that for a lot of people, this is inaccessible. So I guess I feel there's a lot at stake for people to speaking up in these environments. So one thing is just start off with, pair and share, get somebody to talk with each other. I don't know whether that's and then build up from there, or, things like small groups where get a leader and then make sure everybody gets the opportunity to speak in a small group before others jump in and respond. So just that sense of other people being heard. And then make sure there's enough time. I keep on being obsessed about time, but I feel having enough time to report that back to the whole group, because I've been in so many sessions where the small groups have discussed and then they've said we've run out of time. And I don't know about you, but I find it really disappointing that there's no share. Even if somebody within a small group doesn't want to speak up, I think there's something really valuable about having those group reports. So I think that's one way of doing it. But yeah, I'm still learning. I'm finding this fascinating, listening to the conversations, because I appreciate that it is about speaking back to these institutions, speaking back to science, and thinking about these things in very different ways, rather than just working with the people in the room. So yeah, that's given me quite a bit to think about, I think.
Thank you, Michelle. And Tilina, in your experience, what you can share?
Yes. As facilitators, we are sort of all inclined, most of us, to measure the success, how loud the room is. And I think that's sort of something we have to change ourselves, because it doesn't have to be verbally loud to measure a success. And because I think one of the things I really like to do is that in the beginning, you mentioned that you can contribute verbally, in written, or even just by reflecting. And reflecting internally, reflecting is also valid. Not everybody need to say out something loud. And I would at all cost avoid pointing somebody out and say, let's hear from you because you haven't spoken in a while, or you haven't said something. And that's actually really counterproductive, even if somebody wants to speak. And instead of doing that, I think we have to sort of find ways to offer multiple modes of participation, like verbal, written, chat boxes, whichever way they're comfortable with. Yeah, so I think acknowledging sort of like different level of comfortness. And I do believe that most of this starts from the facilitators, like us. Our expectation is really high that, as I said in the beginning, like the more loud the room is, that we think it's the more successful, but it's not really. So maybe move away from like making it louder and actually making it more relevant. Even you can do a workshop in a very quiet environment and still make it very successful.
Thank you very much, Tilina. And something that Luz have considered in this participation, you talk about the co-creation processes between scientists, artists, and other individuals, with deafness or blindness. And more often we find this willing to co-create with publics or with persons. So how do you facilitate, again, the participation of scientists, artists, and public by equal in your context in Latin America?
Well, yes, I mentioned a residence process that we did at the museum. And one thing that is very important when you want to include diverse publics, for example, people with some disabilities, you have to really reach out. You have to make a specific invitation, because, I mean, as I said before, they are not like used to have this invitation, or they just think they don't have a place for them. So you have to be like, to reach out and make a specific invitation. And during that residency, we call La Casa Señante, which is a deaf culture movement artistic collective, and they collaborated with an artist, Germán, and they also collaborated with people at the museum, like some professional at the museum. They had a lot of conversations, a lot of visits to the exhibits. And we, of course, had an interpreter work with us. And she was also part of the team. She was not just doing, the interpretation, but she was also like proposing ideas and everything. And when you do these processes, you have to be able to shift the way you do things, because you are including the difference, but you're also, you have to change. I mean, that's a fact. You don't have, I mean, it's not, you have to change the way you do things. You have to invest sometimes more time than you expected, because conversation might be different. You are communicating in 2 different languages. It's not just time for interpretation, but it's time to build an idea between different points of view and points of reading the word. So you have to shift the way you do. So you have to be open to that, to adapt to the things that you are finding during your way and during your work. So I would say conversation and have everything as clear as possible, but also be open-minded that you have to change and adapt things during your work.
Thank you very much. And also, I would love to listen. What do you think about how to respectfully manage dominating voices or insensitive comments? I mean, dominating voices in science are very often too, because we love what we do, and scientists talk a lot, and sometimes you say, please, 10 minutes, and they speak 20 minutes. Or also, as Nick mentioned, maybe we are exposed to insensitive comments, and how to deal with that during the event or during a workshop or during a conference. Anyone who wants to start? Fine.
Maybe I'll just start by saying that a lot of events are curated around particular issues or particular happenings, particular events, and that maybe this is the first opportunity people in a community have had to speak back to an institution. So if they're going off topic or they're upset, it may not be inappropriate. It's just that nobody's listened to them before. So I think listening is such an important thing for people to feel heard. So maybe it's just making sure that you have space for that, even if it isn't necessarily on your agenda. Perhaps what Lewis said about being flexible and deeply hearing what people have to say, because I do think that like Nick said, we can't get away from power. So, somebody's paying for these events. They're hosted to meet particular aims, and we can do so much to help shape that. But once it's started, we really have to make sure that people, if they want to talk about something else, that there's enough space to be able to do that and they feel respected and heard, because maybe that's the most important thing that we see, that we hear, and I guess it's balancing that with the idea of disruption. But I also think audience members can see when people genuinely need to be heard, and we can give some space to that. Yeah, it's a balancing act. I've got no answers, but listening, I think, is important.
Thank you, Michelle. Selena?
Yeah, so this is a very real world question. I think every single conference or session we go to, we have experienced it. At the start, I would also sort of, maybe one of the things we can do is set expectations really early. Explain, like, we value hearing from range of people. If you have spoken once, we invite you to pause and listen before speaking again. That sort of really sort of set the scene that we are hoping only one person would ask a question or comment once. and then we can, and if also things go into certain few individuals speaking more and more, you can also intervene in a way. We are hearing a lot from a few voices. Let's make space for others too. I think but by doing this, one of the important things to keep in mind is not to address the individual, but address the group. So bring the focus into the group itself rather than, pointing out one person. But all of this is quite hard in real life because people are doing so many different things, like have a 1 minute response time and structure tools, like really appealing. But there's always, I have seen, even with so many guidelines and regulations, there's certain times that somebody would go off saying, this is important, because I think one of the, there's always some good intention from that person, but which is valid, we should recognize. But I think the idea should be prioritizing the group inclusion over individual comfort and individual intent. So yeah, setting something early and then interfering very lightly in the middle to bring back the focus to the group itself.
Thank you, Tilina. And well, we are very close to ending this webinar. And Michelle, at the beginning, she started with saying that it's very important also in timekeeping. So it's very difficult. I would love to be here 1 hour, 1 more hour talking about all these topics, but we need to be closing. So I don't know if Nick or Luz wants to add an answer for this same question, or do you want to share a thought about all this conversation?
I would say just in general, just to be aware of where you are at, what is missing, and what have you done also. So you are like understand what's gonna be your work plan to achieve your goal, which might be very different among institutions, among groups, or even among the events that you plan. So just be aware of what's your journey, not just at the event in itself, but how do you want to achieve a greater goal.
Thank you, Luz. Nick?
Yeah, I will attempt to answer the question and also kind of a sum up. If we are not all of these amazing things that were said, if we're not intentional about our spaces, if we're not reflecting on maybe mistakes we've made or things we want to change, or if we're not thinking about how Luz was talking about being reciprocal with partners, if we're not doing these things, then our spaces will look like the outside world, which is not a just space. So we have to actively work against that. And we can do that with our facilitation by structuring things so that like the river of white supremacy doesn't run through and people are riding their boats and jet skis on it. Instead, we might structure things like Lena said earlier of like a multimodal space. Maybe people are taking a little time to think and put things on Post-it notes instead of just rewarding who is the quickest processor and the able to get their hand up first. So just thinking about the ways in which in our spheres of influence, we can push against the justice that is out there and create little pockets for ourselves where we can imagine what the world might look like.
Thank you, Nick. I really like this systematic thinking all together in a big conversations with a lot of diversity of voices and postures. And it has been very, very nice to talk to you, to listen to you. And it's time to closing this session. Again, I am Ana Claudia. I'm member of the PCST Network Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Subcommittee that we have one in PCST. And also I'm from Mexico. I work at National Autonomous University of Mexico. And I didn't introduce my visual. I am a mid woman, Latin America. I'm wearing now a blouse, white blouse with black pattern, triangles pattern. I'm wearing glasses too. And it has been a pleasure to be here with all of you. This video will be recorded or is being recorded and will be available at our PCST YouTube channel in few days. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. And thank you for watching this video.